Hey everyone, it's Melina and welcome back to my channel. I realize I've been gone for like a month or something like that. I've been kind of busy with some ghostwriting. If you need anybody or if you're looking for anybody to ghostwrite, hit me up. And I also read like two books in the month of March. So I figured it would just be better to combine the two into one video. I don't know why, but I woke up this morning thinking about how if my goal is to read 50 books and there are 52 weeks in a year, I have to basically read a book a week. And then I got into looking into like how many weeks into the year are we in? 26, if anybody's wondering. And I've read 16 books. I'm like, I gotta get a move on. And then also some personal news. I got accepted into a counseling psychology PhD program at Northeastern. I'm super excited about that. I'll probably end up making some videos about that as well, especially, my journey as like a first generation college student through the process and anything that I might learn. And hopefully it'll be helpful to some of you. Um, but all that to say, I really want to get a majority of my reading goal done by then because I can imagine when that begins, I'm going to be reading a lot of like textbooks and academic things. And I just don't feel that that would be super interesting to my book review crowd. Um, so I've been recently delving into a lot of like fantasy. I love fantasy. Before that, I think I was reading a little more like nonfiction, some poetry books, but um, I'm kind of like, I don't know when I'm going to have the time to read this much fiction again in the future. So I've really been like channeling that side of myself and allowing myself to just like go far into like the world of creativity before I have to be creative in a different way, like with my dissertation and all that stuff. So, yeah, so I am going to start with the first book that I read in March. So this book is actually like the one non-fantasy book that I read, and I read it as part of a project that I was working on for somebody. It's called When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead. And I'm just going to read you the description. Miranda is an ordinary sixth grader until she starts receiving mysterious messages from somebody who knows all about her, including things that have not even happened yet. Each message brings her closer to believing that only she can prevent a tragic death until the final note makes her think she's too late. So I loved this book because it was written about such kind of like ordinary events, like middle schoolers working in a cafeteria, but it was written in a way that made it so interesting. And another thing I like too is there are some really serious things that happen in this, like violence and um, death and whatever, and poverty, but it's written through the eyes of, I think the main character is supposed to be like 11 or 12, I don't remember. Um, and so a lot of it has this kind of like innocence to it. I feel like if this book had been written from an adult perspective, it could have been so much darker than it was. But I really liked kind of like the lightheartedness, this kind of like childy lightheartedness. And even there's like I guess this is like a bit of a spoiler, but it's not a huge spoiler. There's this cute scene between her and this boy that she's a crush on, where she thinks that maybe he likes her and she doesn't really know. She's not really sure because, if you can remember back to middle school, we weren't exactly the most like communicative people. At least I wasn't very romantically well versed. I don't know that I am now, but I definitely wasn't when I was like 12. Um, Anyway, he knocks on her door, kisses her, and like runs away. And I don't know why, but that was like so cute and so endearing to me. And then there's also this kind of like almost like magical element where she's getting these notes from somebody, and it seems like they are like from the future or from somebody who like is all knowing. And it's written in such a way that I guess honestly this does kind of fit into the fantasy books that I read, but like unintentionally, because I found myself thinking like maybe there is like some kind of like logical explanation to all of this. It was written in such a way that I was like, this doesn't really feel like magic. I'm not really sure. I feel like maybe there could be like some kind of explanation like Sherlock Holmes at the end about like this is why this happened. And I won't say how it ends, but I kind of liked that aspect to it where I was like, what's going on here? So yeah, and I think she captures like the the plight of a middle schooler super, super well. And just the things that you're concerned about, like when we're in middle school, not that we're not social in elementary school or like as adults, but when you're in middle school, I feel like for me at least, we cared so much about what other people thought about us and like our friendships and our social standings. And it's kind of cool to see somebody give like that weight to grieving like the end of a friendship or seeing somebody move on or seeing life change. I thought that was cute. It's funny because when I was in middle school, I hated the idea of like being a tween, being in middle school. But now that I'm older, I have this kind of like, I don't know, fondness. Not that I necessarily want to go back to sixth grade. I don't. Um, but I feel like whenever I see middle schoolers and they're like awkward or they're trying to figure themselves out, like, I don't know, it kind of warms my heart, this like transitional phase. I think there's something kind of like beautiful to the clunkiness and the awkwardness of it. And maybe that's just like the poet in me, but I kind of love it. So I give that one 5 stars, absolutely, because it was just really beautifully written, like I said. Okay. So the next book that I read, it's part of a series, and I'm going to be talking about all three of them because I read all three of them in the month of April. But I will say that if you haven't read book one, the description of book two is a spoiler of book one. And if you haven't read book three, no. And then if you've read book one, but you haven't read book two, the description of book three is a spoiler for book two. So you have to have read the one before to understand what comes next, or you're going to be confused, or something really major is going to be spoiled for you. So this is your warning. I won't include any spoilers in my talk about book one, but you've been warned. Once I get to book two, if you haven't read it and you're interested in reading it, I would maybe skip, or if you don't care, then listen, and then you can tell me what you thought. So this series is the Caraval series by Stephanie Garber, and the first book in the series is just called Caraval. And I'll read you the description. A legendary competition, a mesmerizing romance, an unbreakable bond between two sisters. Scarlet Dragna has never left the tiny island where she and her sister Tella live with their powerful and cruel father. Now Scarlet's father has arranged a marriage for her, and Scarlet thinks her dreams of seeing Caraval, the faraway once-a-year performance where the audience participates in the show, are over. But this year, Scarlet's long-dreamt-of invitation finally arrives. With the help of a mysterious sailor, Tella whisks Scarlet away to the show. Only as soon as they arrive, Tella is kidnapped by Caraval's mastermind organizer, Legend. It turns out that this season's Caraval revolves around Tella, and whoever finds her first is the winner. Scarlet has been told that everything that happens during Caraval is only an elaborate performance. Nevertheless, she becomes enmeshed in a game of love, heartbreak, and magic. And whether Caraval is real or not, Scarlet must find Tella before the 5 nights of the game are over, or a dangerous domino effect of consequences will be set off, and her beloved sister will disappear forever. Welcome, welcome to Caraval. Beware of getting swept too far away. Okay, so even though they're very, very different stories, this book kind of reminded me of like Inception, where the fact that you know it's not real almost messes you up. I don't know how to explain it. It's like they tell you at the beginning, like it says in the description, like she gets to the island. Well, actually, let me backtrack. They did a really good job of setting up her family and giving you reason to want her to not be there anymore, and to find a different place for her and her sister to live because her father is awful, absolutely awful. So there's that. It caught my attention like from the very beginning. And then when they get to the island where Caraval's happening, it's kind of this like, I kind of think of it as the Hunger Games, except it's not that only one person survives, it's just that one person wins. They're told like nothing you see is real. This is all an illusion. But it's written in such a way that throughout the book you're like, but is it actually real, or are you trying to tell me that it's not real so that I won't believe it when I see it, but it's actually real? And it's this kind of like mind game. I feel like toward the end, especially the last couple of chapters, I was literally, because I listened to it on audiobook, I was sitting in my kitchen like this, like just listening to it, and I didn't know like what was the truth. And I loved that. I love books that can fool me. Like I would think I knew what was happening, and then something else would happen, and I'd be like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So I definitely would recommend this one. I gave this one 5 stars. It's just so interesting from beginning to end, and like the lore that this author wraps the story up in, I thought was really, really cool. So it had like a magical element to it where you were like, but is this magic? But is this like it wasn't denied that there was magic, but you just didn't know what was what, I guess. And then I also, because I love like enemies to lovers, like I love Scarlet and the sailor that is mentioned. They have to work together, and there's like a tension between them, and I just love it. I loved their banter and the fact that it was like, I'll tease you, but like as soon as we need to be serious, like we're going to be serious. So I really, really liked this book in the series, and I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for something that's going to keep you like on the edge of your seat, because that's how I felt reading it. Right now, I'm actually reading a spin-off series. I can't really say what it's about without giving away the ending of like book 3. But I was super excited to find that the author had released, I think the second one's coming out later this year. The first one's called Once Upon a Broken Heart. Um, and I was super excited to find out that the author had not only released new books, because I love the way she writes, but also had continued to incorporate this particular like world. So 5 stars to that one. So once again, I'm going to read the description of the next one. And this is a spoiler about the end of the first one. So if you don't want to hear, skip to the next set. We'll skip the next one too, because it'll also spoil. But skip the section. You've been warned. Your time is done. Okay. So the second book is called Legendary, because it's about legend. And this is the description of that one. A heart to protect, a debt to repay, a game to win. After being swept up in the magical world of Caraval, Donatella Dragna has finally escaped her father and saved her sister Scarlet from a disastrous arranged marriage. The girl should be celebrating, but Tella isn't free yet. She made a desperate bargain with a mysterious criminal, and what Tella owes him, no one has ever been able to deliver. Caraval, Master Legend's true name. The only chance of uncovering Legend's identity is to win Caraval. So Tella throws herself into the legendary competition once more, and into the path of the murderous heir to the throne, a doomed love story in a web of secrets, including her sister's. Caraval has always demanded bravery, cunning, and sacrifice, but now the game is asking for more. If Tella can't fulfill her bargain and deliver Legend's name, she'll lose everything she cares about, maybe even her life. But if she wins, Legend and Caraval will be destroyed forever. Welcome, welcome to Caraval. The games have only just begun. So, when it started and it was in Donatella's point of view, I didn't know how I felt because I got really, really attached to Scarlet and Julian. But quickly, I was invested because I feel like I like that they have such different personalities. Like I feel like so because Scarlet is older and Tella is younger, I and so much has been placed on I feel like I relate to Scarlet more because I'm the older sister. So much has been placed on Scarlet. She has all these like responsibilities and this like legacy to uphold, and she's a lot more serious, and Tella is a lot more like she's a lot more like free, and she kind of has this idea that her parents, well, their mom is gone, but her dad like outrightly didn't really care about either of them, but cared much more about Scarlet than her. And she has this idea that her mom like didn't care about her either. So she's kind of like, I am going to make a life for myself that is meaningful to me. Um, and I kind of liked her recklessness. Like, even though it stressed me, I liked following her recklessness because Scarlet, her sister, is a lot more like, I'm going to do things by the book and just reading a story, even though I am not really a reckless person, reading a story about someone and exploring that recklessness is like interesting. And then, of course, there's the character of Dante, whom I love. I thought I couldn't love anybody more than Julian, but I was wrong. I love Dante more. Um, I don't know, because I think like, so I realized in looking back at book 1, I thought Scarlet and Julian were enemies to lovers, but they weren't really. They were just like people who didn't really like each other, but they were never really enemies. And Dante and Tella, once again, it's not that they're really like enemies, it's just that there's a lot of like secrets between them, which I mean leads into like the misunderstanding trope comes up a lot for them, which is very annoying. but it also makes things very interesting, where there's a lot of like intrigue and like, what am I willing to give up for this person? And then they introduce the concept of the fates. Well, they had already been introduced in book one, but I kind of thought that it was gonna be something like mentioned, like deities that they kind of pray to, but are never like relevant to the story, but they are very relevant to the story. And once again, it's similar to book one in such a way that like I was like, are these actually the fates or is this just part of the game? I don't really know. And then it's like Caraval's going on, but then the fates, specifically the Prince of Hearts, Jax, has like this desire to find out who Legend is. And I'm kind of like, whose side am I on here? Like, I actually don't know. Am I on the fate side? Am I on Legend side? Because it's interesting when you look at a book through like the perspective that you're taught, or the perspective that you're given. And to me, I have to wonder sometimes, like, just because just because this is the character that I'm seeing things through the eyes of doesn't mean that they're necessarily in the right. And so like, even though Legend helped Tella and Scarlet in book one, doesn't mean that he's a good guy. So throughout the book, I'm like, are the fates in the right? I don't really know. And are they even real? Or is this just another part of the game? Um, I feel like though there were certain parts that were a little like jumbled just because there were so many characters incorporated. It felt like there was a lot going on sometimes. And for that reason, I gave it a 4 instead of a 5, but it was still a really great book. And I wonder if this had been the first book and hadn't immediately followed Caraval, if I would have given it a 5, and probably I would have, because book one was just so good. But I definitely would still recommend the series, which is weird because the second book or the second movie is usually my favorite, but this one was probably my least favorite, but it was still really good. It's just like the relativity to the first one, it wasn't as good. And now I'm going to talk about book three, which once again is contains spoilers if you have not read book two. So if you want to skip, now is your chance. Here is the description. It's called Finale, aptly named. A love worth fighting for, a dream worth dying for, an ending worth waiting for. It's been 2 months since the Fates were freed from the deck of cards, 2 months since Legend claimed the throne for his own, and 2 months since Tella discovered the boy she fell in love with doesn't really exist. With lives, empires, and hearts hanging in the balance, Tella must decide if she's going to trust Legend or a former enemy. After uncovering a secret that upends her life, Scarlet will need to do the impossible, and Legend has a choice to make that will forever change and define him. Caraval is over, but perhaps the greatest game of all has begun. There are no spectators this time, only those who will win and those who will lose everything. Welcome, welcome to Finale. All games must come to an end. So, I was a little bit sad. I felt the same way that I felt in Mockingjay, where I was like, oh, there are no games, even though like the games were horrible. But I was kind of sad that there was no Caraval this year, but it obviously made sense because there were so many other things going on that Legend wasn't gonna throw a Caraval. Onto the spoiler. Legend being Dante or Dante being Legend, I didn't really know how I felt about it at first. I didn't really want him to be Legend, but at the same time, I feel like it's fitting for Tella to fall in love with Legend. And he was so like, I wanted to cheer for him so bad. I wanted him to just, I wanted him to see that like love was more important than power. So it's this, once again, like this dynamic where I'm like, who am I cheering for? And then the fates coming in, and like the fallen star and all these other fates and how that impacted the story, and like the fallen star being involved with their mom, and how like the dynamic that he has going on with Scarlet. It was very, very intriguing. I felt like this one, despite the fact that I was sad that it didn't include Caraval, I feel like it had a lot of intrigue. And the author did such a good job in the second book in making me invested in Tella that I was happy that this book was primarily about Tella, although it did pan to Scarlet a lot, which was cool, to see how they kind of work together to, I don't even want to say defeat the fates, because it's not all the fates that are evil and they all have different like motives. And even like Tella being Jax's one true love, like being thrown into the mix, gave it a little more of like um a human element to it. So I really, really liked this. I give this one 5 stars too. I thought it was a good wrapping up to the story. I actually listened to it. We drove down to South Carolina and then we were there on vacation. I listened to it on the way down. I listened to it while I was there. I could not stop listening to it because I needed to know how it ended. And I loved like once again the lore of it all. And I liked that the doors were kind of open in this one for us to see like, no, the fates are real. Legend is real. He is powerful, but is he as powerful as the fates and what's going to happen? So I thought the author did a good job at ending, because not all series that start out super well end super well. Like one I can think of off the top of my head is Divergent. I did not like Allegiant. I thought it was a really poorly executed ending, unfortunately. And I feel the same way about The Giver. I feel like it was kind of both of those books, I don't know if this is true, this is just speculation. They seem like they were started without knowing how it was going to end. I don't like fully know how I feel about the end of the Hunger Games, but it might be the same. I don't know. One ending that I am content with is obviously the Cruel Prince series. I love that series. And then also the Maze Runner. But sometimes you get these stories in the mix where you're like, did you know how this was going to end, or did you just start with a cool concept and hope you would figure it out along the way? And this one definitely doesn't feel that way because it incorporates so many things from like book 2 and book 1 that you're like, okay, this had to have been thought through beforehand. You had to have known that you were building up to this. And it was interesting because the author gave you the information in book 1 or book 2 that would be relevant in later books, but in a way that almost made me at least feel like, oh, this is just cool information for me to know without realizing this would be crucial information to the plot down the line. So I thought it was really, really good in that way. And finally, I was finally caught by A Court of Thorns and Roses. I think it was around the time that I read The Cruel Prince. I went on to Tumblr because I feel like Tumblr is the best place for like fan anything, like drawings and little like fan fiction snippets. And I fixate on things sometimes when I become really obsessed. So I went on Tumblr and I started seeing a lot of Shadow and Bone actually, which I have to read. Maybe I'll read that next once I'm done with the series, this kind of world of books. I started seeing a lot about like Kaz, and I also started seeing a lot about A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I think these started coming out in 2015. So it might have been over by the time The Cruel Prince began. I'm not really sure, but because it's a lot more related than Shadow and Bone. It's both about like Fae and all of that. Um, and I was always kind of like, ooh, interesting. And for some reason, I just never read them. I don't know why. And I've known people who have said it's really good, and I've known people who have said that they don't like it. So I was kind of like, at one point I was like, I just need to know on my own, because I kept also seeing like TikToks or things on Tumblr about it, and I was like, I want to laugh. Like I want to know. I think the straw that broke the camel's back for me was like a TikTok that I didn't understand, and I was like, I want to know what this is about. I also would like to laugh. And I've managed to avoid a lot of like pretty big spoilers, with the exception of the fact that I guess this the spoiler. If you don't know this by now, it's been 7 years. Whatever. I'm just gonna say it. You have 1 second to get away. Tamlin in the first book, well, not in the first book, in the second book, ends up being like evil basically, and she ends up not liking him as much as she did in the first one, and whatever, their relationship devolves. I don't know if they get back together. I'm almost done with the second one, A Court of Mist and Fury. But even so, I was able to enjoy the first book. So let me read the description, then I'll go into talking about how I feel. Feyre's survival rests upon her ability to hunt and kill. The forest where she lives is a cold, bleak place in the long winter months. So when she spots a deer in the forest being pursued by a wolf, she cannot resist fighting it for the flesh. But to do so, she must kill the predator, and killing something so precious comes at a price. Dragged to a magical kingdom for the murder of a fairy, Feyre discovers that her captor, his face obscured by a jewel mask, is hiding far more than his piercing green eyes would suggest. Feyre's presence at the court is closely guarded, and she begins to learn why. Her feelings for him turn from hostility to passion, and the fairylands become an even more dangerous place. Feyre must fight to break an ancient curse, or she will lose him forever. And yes, the book is as dramatic as it sounds. Um, so, in my opinion, it is a book worth reading. I did give it 4 stars, only because I felt like there were parts of it that were very slow, like the beginning. Um, I feel like we could have gotten a little less information about her being at home and her family dynamic. Like, I mean, I didn't like her family, and I think that was what I was supposed to feel. I felt like they kind of left her to do whatever. And even her being the youngest was upsetting to me. The fact that they were like, yes, go out into the forest where all these dangerous animals are. You're the one who is to provide for us, and we're never going to be grateful. Just because, like, as an older sister too, I'm like, how could her 2 older sisters just be like, yes, go ahead, go off into danger, we're never going to help you, and we're never going to show gratitude for it? That was very annoying, and I think that was how I was supposed to feel. um but I just felt like it was a little long. Like, I feel like 2 hours in, I was like, okay, I don't care anymore about her homeland. I know that the Fae are across the wall, so can we get there? I thought the way that she ended up getting there was very interesting. um I thought it was cool, and I liked the dynamic of, like, we don't trust the Fae, we don't like the Fae at the beginning, because I think when a story starts off with hostility, it just lends to more interesting scenes. um and I also felt like there were some points in the middle that were a little, like, slow as well. It just felt like there was a lot of, like, Feyre being in the woods and Feyre talking to Lucian and whatever. So I felt like I could have done a little bit less without that. But as a whole, I do think it was very interesting. And the part that she goes under the mountain to fight Amarantha, and to try to free Tamlin, that whole part was really interesting. I almost felt like it could have been a book on its own. Um, but so obviously, as I said, Tamlin in the second book ends up being like a jerk. And knowing that, honestly, kind of, even though I did like him in the first book, it did make me kind of more aware in the first book of some of the ways that he was acting, um and how, like, aggressive and controlling and kind of manipulative he could be. And so that was interesting to have that perspective. I thought that he was going to do something evil at the end of the first book, like in the Red Queen, but no. Which, on the author's part, I actually thought was kind of like an interesting move, that you had this book that came out, and then you had, like, whatever, 6 months to a year between this book and the next book. And so you had all this time to really love, like, Feyre and Tamlin, just to have it, like, kind of flipped on you in the second book. I thought that was really interesting. But also, I liked that there wasn't really foreshadowing of, like, this is how it's going to turn into, because that does happen in relationships. People put their best foot forward, and then over time they reveal their true selves, or they go through something super traumatic like Tamlin and Feyre did, and it changes them into a person that you don't like. So I liked that dynamic, and the idea of, like, your first love isn't always like your one true love, and you can be really in love with someone and not have, like, those red flags or those alarms going off in your head, and still it ends up morphing into something that you don't like. um so I really enjoyed that. I love the Fae. I love the concept of, like, magic and powers and all this stuff. I don't know what it is, but I love it. And I also, one thing I will say about this one compared to The Cruel Prince is it's a little more, like, explicit than The Cruel Prince. I'm not really, like, I know that there's a big market in fantasy books for, like, the smut aspect of it. I don't really care for that part as much. I'm kind of more of, like Bridgerton season 1, Bridgerton season 2. I'm much more into, like, longing gazes and, like, fingers touching than, like, the really explicit scenes. I tend to skip those just because, I don't know, the buildup for me is actually more like it's thrilling. So I thought there were more explicit scenes in the first one, and then I read the second one and I was like, whoa, there are a lot more in this one. I'm, like, skipping through, like, 10 minutes worth of stuff. Um which, I mean, if you're reading for that, whatever, that's totally cool if that's what you want. For me, I'm kind of more into, like, the intrigue and, like, the build up, and I really like the 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 relationships between these different characters. And I like that you can really feel that the relationships are complex because some of them are, like, 500 years old. So you can imagine that, plus, like, the dynamic of the different courts. I think there are seven courts. Yeah, seven courts. And then the human lands and like all this history and the war. I thought that was really interesting. And it's cool too because it's like Feyre learns about the war and then she meets characters who are like, I fought in the war. I remember this. And I thought that was really interesting because it's kind of to me like, I don't know, we were talking about the American Revolution and you met someone who's like, I remember those days. Like that would be really, and not as interesting, I feel like, as, I don't know, the Fae, no offense, but still it would be interesting. But anyway, where was I going with that? Oh yes, I think the intrigue between like the courts and like the court dynamic was really interesting to me as well, where it felt like it wasn't just a book entirely about like the romantic aspect, although it was there and you know, it's important to the storyline. But I also feel like the author is really good at making me care about that dynamic, like about Amarantha controlling the Fey lands and whatever's going on with the King of Highburn. Because sometimes I feel like in books like this, I lose mm, not my train of thought. I lose interest in like the fighting scenes because of the way it's described, and I'm just kind of like, I don't really care. I'm not really like a violence person. I consider myself more of a pacifist too. So I think it's interesting when there's stuff that involves like intelligence, like in this case, especially when Amarantha gives Feyre all the tasks that she has to complete to be able to free the Fae and whatnot. I find that stuff a lot more interesting than just like, and then we stormed in and then we beat them up. Or when there are powers involved, like, I don't know, that's just more interesting to me. So I really liked it. Like I said, I did give this one 4 stars. I'm finishing up A Court of Mist and Fury right now. I'll probably finish it today because I've become obsessed. Um, and I feel like I'm gonna give that one a 5, but stay tuned because I guess the last 4 hours could completely ruin everything for me. Um, but I did really like the series, and I think it is interesting how the author is able to bring in like so many characters and keep me interested in all of them. I find myself like googling on like the fan wiki, like what does Tamlin look like, or what is, and I'm trying like not to, I'm trying to like blur my eyes when I look because it's happened to me before that I go to look someone up and then I see like status deceased and I don't know what happens to them at the end. I just know that like Tamlin betrays Feyre and I think I already passed that part in A Court of Mist and Fury. Um, I think Nesta and Cassian also get together, hence Nessian. I'm pretty sure I've seen that on Tumblr. That hasn't happened where I am yet, but I'll be interested to see how that happens, if that's even in this series or if it's in the spin-off series. I don't know. I don't know what the spin-off series is about. So I kind of like that it feels like there's a lot that I still don't know. Like I don't know if any of them die. And I also I think it's interesting because now as I'm reading the second one, and like Resand, I think his name is pronounced. I kind of like, I prefer Resand, but it's not my book, so let me just Resand. Or Reese, as she calls him. There's so much that happens in this book that I'm like, oh my god, this first book intentionally set it up so that this could happen. And once again, it feels like, even though the books are almost like 1,000 pages long, it feels like the one I'm listening to is 23 hours long, which is really really long. um it feels like there were a lot of really intentional choices and things that now you're like, oh my god, like that makes sense. So I really liked it. Definitely would not recommend to give to like your 10-year-old child, because it can be really explicit and I get really embarrassed. So I don't know why I'm embarrassed. Nobody is around, but I'm embarrassed and I skip through those scenes and I'm like, occasionally they talk in the middle of it and I'm like, oh my goodness, and I skip to the parts where they're saying something that is of interest and then I start skipping again. As soon as anything explicit starts being described, I'm like, I gotta go. um but other than that, I really really have been enjoying this series. I'm looking forward to finishing this one and starting, I think the next one's called A Court of Wings and Ruin. And to finally being able to like go on TikTok or go on Tumblr and like follow the hashtag and see what people are saying, because I've been like blurring my eyes for years now, knowing that at some point I would come to read these books. So yeah, I definitely would recommend those. And after I finish this book or this series I'm going to finish Once Upon a Broken Heart, I think it's called, which is a spin-off from Caraval. And then I don't know what I'm going to read next. So if you have any good fantasy suggestions, let me know, because that's really what I'm into right now. Like I said, I think this is the appropriate time for me to read like this kind of really, really fictional, like not at all realistic. Even though there are realistic elements to it, obviously it has to be relatable, even if it's a book about like two leads who fall in love with each other. Like there's an aspect to it that has to be relatable, but it's not on Earth and it's not related to anything that we know. And it's nice to like escape sometimes into this kind of stuff. So yeah, if you have any book recommendations, let me know. If you have any questions for me about like my own writing, let me know. If you have any questions about the PhD program that I mentioned, also let me know. I'm looking forward to finishing the books that I'm reading and then moving on to new things. It's good to like, I've been really thankful for like good books and inspirational things recently. Um, because I feel like it just helps me to be like a better person, a better writer, and like overall, I don't know, happier. I guess I know that's really dramatic, but it's true. So yeah, so be on the lookout for new videos. My friend and I are potentially going to be doing a series on like The Hobbit slash Lord of the Rings and maybe some other movies because I'm obsessed with those as well. And yeah, thank you for tuning in and feel free to, message me below in the comments. I will see you guys next time. Bye.